Natalie was excited to return to Africa for her favorite cousin's wedding. She had spent her childhood in the Ivory Coast, where her mother was from, but during her teenage years, her family had relocated to France, her father's birthplace, for stability and studies after a prolonged period of political unrest in the Ivory Coast. It was Thursday when she arrived, traveling alone since her family had some issues with their boarding passes. Natalie was one of the bridesmaids, and the groom's best man, Kofi, had volunteered to pick her up. Kofi was a familiar face from her childhood. They'd all gone to the same school in Ivory Coast before she moved abroad. She'd heard he'd once wanted to ask her out, though he'd never tried. She'd found him cute back then, but her attention had been fully on her studies and photography. As she walked through the arrivals area, Natalie spotted Kofi. It had been 5 years since they'd last seen each other, and he looked both familiar and transformed, taller, more muscular, and somehow even more attractive. He greeted her warmly, his admiration evident, which made her unexpectedly blush. During the ride to her hotel, they laughed and caught up, recalling fond memories from their high school years. Kofi dropped her off at the hotel and promised to return the next day to pick her up at 10 for lunch with her cousin Shera, the bride. That night, after settling in, Natalie drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Natalie was up early, already ready and waiting by 9. Kofi, who ran a well-known restaurant where the wedding reception would take place, was the only one who could pick her up. When he arrived, she rushed down to meet him. Together, they headed to the rehearsal, where they met Shera, her fiancé, the bridesmaids, and the groomsmen, all rehearsing their entrance dance. Everyone was delighted to see Natalie, except for the twin sisters, Tina and Tonya. The twins had a history of being critical and difficult, and they greeted Natalie with strained smiles. Tonya, in particular, was visibly displeased to see her arriving with Kofi, remembering how he had once politely rebuffed her romantic interest. Natalie, recalling Tonya as a bully from school, quickly greeted the twins before moving on to her seat. The twins, though not close to the family, had been invited due to their parents' long-standing friendship with the bride's family and had volunteered to assist with hospitality during the wedding. When the ceremony began, everything was picture perfect. The bridesmaids and groomsmen performed their entrance dance, and the newlyweds had their beautiful first dance. Soon, it was time to eat, and Natalie joined the line for food, which was managed by the hospitality committee. She noticed Tonya serving food at the end of the table, despite being assigned only to usher. As Natalie moved closer, she saw the dish Tonya was handling, fried plantains, a nostalgic treat she hadn't had in years. She accepted the food with a polite smile and found her seat. The atmosphere was lively, with upbeat music, a funny MC, and the newlyweds brimming with joy. But soon, Natalie's joy turned to discomfort as she began feeling bloated, her stomach cramping painfully. She hurried to the bathroom, feeling like she might be sick. She stayed there for half an hour, hot and miserable, but unable to vomit. Her phone rang. It was Kofi, worried when he saw her empty seat. She explained her condition, and he assured her he'd send someone from his staff to help. A few minutes later, a woman arrived, and together they guided Natalie upstairs to Kofi's office, a calm, private space. Meanwhile, Kofi had been investigating the security footage to understand what could have caused Natalie's sudden illness. He had ginger peppermint tea prepared for her, which brought her a sense of warmth and relaxation as she sipped it. Soon, Kofi returned, having confirmed his suspicions. He told Natalie that the twins, Tina and Tonya, were behind her sickness. Security footage had captured Tonya sneaking into the serving area to add mouldy spices to the fried plantains, then swapping the tray after serving Natalie. The newlyweds, after viewing the footage, had ordered the twins to be escorted from the venue with a warning of legal action if Natalie's health suffered further. Overwhelmed, Natalie's emotions spilled over in tears. She had come all this way for her cousin's wedding, and now her family's flight had been delayed due to ticket issues, leaving her feeling isolated in the midst of all that had happened. Seeing her distress, Coffee gently comforted her, promising to look after her. He decided they should visit the hospital for a checkup, assuring the newlyweds that everything was under control. At the hospital, all tests came back clear, and Natalie could finally relax. As she waited in the hospital room for Coffee's return, her family suddenly entered, shouting, "Surprise!" Coffee had arranged for their late arrival and accommodations. Her mother whispered to her that Coffee was a truly exceptional man, urging her not to let him go. After she shared the whole ordeal with them, laughter and a sense of warmth filled the room as they all caught up. But as they prepared to leave, Natalie couldn't help but wonder about Coffee's whereabouts. Just as she thought of him, Coffee re-entered the room with a tender smile. He'd arranged transportation back to the reception for her family, and as they left, he sat beside her and spoke sincerely about his feelings. He admitted he'd always regretted not asking her out before she left years ago, and was now eager to pursue a meaningful relationship, envisioning a future with someone like her, intelligent, beautiful, and kind. In that moment, Natalie's doubts seemed to melt away. She reached for his hand, expressing her gratitude for the tea and for opening her eyes to a future she hadn't considered. They laughed, sharing a warm, joyful moment, both knowing this connection was the start of something beautiful.